The morning sun had just broken through the horizon, casting a soft golden light over the quiet roadside diner. Steam rose from thick ceramic coffee cups. The low, deep rumble of powerful engines filled the crisp air, and the sharp smell of gasoline, sizzling bacon, and worn leather clung to the group of Hell's Angels bikers who had stopped for breakfast. They were big men, built of muscle and steel, their faces set like stone. They were the kind of men that people instinctively crossed the street to avoid. But beneath those leather vests stitched with fierce emblems, they carried stories no one ever bothered to ask about. Their rough laughter echoed against the polished chrome of their motorcycles, a sound that seemed to own the morning, until a single piercing cry shattered the peace. Everything stopped. Forks hung in mid-air. Conversations died. Every head turned. A tiny figure in a tattered red dress was running desperately across the parking lot, her small boots slipping on the cold pavement. Her messy light brown hair flew behind her like a wild flag. Her face was a heartbreaking mask of streaks, made of tears and dirt, and her voice cracked with a terror so pure it silenced the world. "Please," she screamed, her small arm outstretched, a trembling finger pointing back toward the two-lane road. "They're hurting my mama. Please, somebody help her." The group of bikers froze, their hard expressions suddenly uncertain. The sound of the little girl's sobs was so raw, so completely broken, that even the idling engines seemed to fall silent in respect. A few truckers standing near the gas pumps turned their heads, looked at each other, and then looked away, not wanting to get involved. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved. The entire world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. No one moved, except for one man. The man who stepped forward was Mason Cole, a broad-shouldered biker in his late 30s. His jacket was a tapestry of his life on the road, crowned by the red and white winged skull of the Hell's Angels. He'd seen a lot in his life, brutal fights, bitter betrayals, and enough blood to last a lifetime. But he had never seen a child's fear look quite like this. Without a word, he moved toward her and dropped to one knee, his large, calloused hands gently taking her trembling ones. His size alone should have been terrifying, but his action was one of pure tenderness. "Where's your mama?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, but softer than anyone had ever heard it. The little girl could barely speak through her gasping sobs, but she pointed again down the empty road toward a small, forgotten cluster of old trailers half hidden by overgrown trees. "They're beating her!" she cried, her body shaking uncontrollably. "Please, you have to help her." A fire lit in Mason's eyes. Without a second of hesitation, he rose to his full, imposing height, his face hardening into a mask of cold purpose. "Tank rider, with me!" he barked, not a request, but a command, motioning to two of his brothers. The three men moved as one unit, swinging their legs over their massive Harleys. The engines didn't just start. They exploded to life with a deafening roar that shook the windows of the diner. Tires screeched on the asphalt as they tore down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and wind in their wake. They disappeared in seconds, leaving everyone else behind in a stunned, heavy silence. The little girl, still shaking, was gently guided inside by one of the remaining bikers, who wrapped her small frame in his own leather jacket, swallowing her in its protective warmth. She sat by the window, her wide, terrified eyes fixed on the spot where the red taillights had vanished into the morning haze. The road stretched quiet for what felt like an eternity, nearly 5 long minutes. Then, faintly at first, the sounds of chaos drifted back on the wind, the muffled sound of angry shouting, a woman's sharp cry of pain, and then the unmistakable furious roar of engines being revved, a sound of pure intimidation cutting through the violence. Mason and his crew had found the trailer. What they saw when they kicked the door in was a scene that would burn itself into their memories forever. A man, his eyes wild and his breath thick with the sour smell of whiskey, had cornered a woman against a peeling wall. His fists were already bloodied, his voice a slurred torrent of rage. The small, cracked window let in a single sliver of weak sunlight that fell across the terrified woman's face. illuminating the dark bruises already blooming on her skin. Before the man could strike her again, the heavy sound of steel-toed boots hit the flimsy floorboards. Mason moved faster than a man his size should be able to. He grabbed the man's wrist mid-swing, twisting it with brutal efficiency and forcing him to drop the bottle he'd been clutching. It shattered on the dirty floor. The other two bikers pinned the man to the ground effortlessly, their weight and strength overwhelming him in an instant. There were no words, just swift, decisive action. Mason turned to the woman, his fierce expression instantly softening. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, his voice laced with a tightly controlled anger. She could only nod weakly, relief and pain causing fresh tears to spill down her bruised cheeks. Outside, the distant wail of police sirens began to grow louder. A neighbor, hearing the commotion, must have finally called it in. When the sheriff's cars pulled up, lights flashing, the bikers didn't run. They stood calmly in the dusty yard, hands raised but not in surrender, more in a gesture of finality. The little girl was now clinging tightly to Mason's leg. The woman, whose name was Carla, stepped forward and explained everything to the officers. The man was her ex-boyfriend, just released from jail, who had tracked her and her daughter down that morning. As the police led him away in handcuffs, Mason quietly walked the little girl, Hannah, back to his motorcycle. "You did good, kid," he said softly, his voice full of a strange pride. "You were brave." They rode back to the diner together. Hannah sat in front of him, clutching a helmet that was far too big for her small head, as the morning sun now rose fully above the horizon, washing the world in clean, bright light. By the time they returned, a small crowd had gathered. Truckers, travelers, and diner regulars were all waiting anxiously, their breakfast forgotten. When they saw Mason carrying the little girl, unharmed, with her mother walking slowly but safely behind them, every conversation stopped. The world seemed to go silent for a moment, as if no one wanted to break the fragile peace. Carla, her voice still shaking, tried to thank the bikers, repeating herself over and over. "I didn't think anyone would come," she whispered, her eyes full of disbelief. Mason simply looked at her and then nodded toward Hannah. "She made sure we did." The diner's owner came out with fresh blankets and hot coffee, offering them without a word. One by one, the Hells Angels took off their own heavy jackets, their armor, and draped them around Carla and Hannah. It was a gesture so unexpected, so contrary to their image, that even the police officers, still lingering by their cars, looked on with a quiet, unspoken respect. The silver threads in the patch on Mason's vest caught the light as he leaned down to speak to Hannah one last time. "You take care of your mama now, all right?" he said. "You're her little guardian angel." The girl nodded, her small fingers gripping the thick leather of his sleeve. News of what happened spread like wildfire. By lunchtime, half the town had heard the story of the little girl who ran to a pack of bikers for help, and how the Hells Angels didn't hesitate for a single second. Strangers stopped by the diner just to shake their hands, to thank them for stepping in when everyone else had frozen. Mason wasn't a man of many words, but when a reporter from the local paper asked him why they had done it, he just shrugged and said, "You don't ignore a cry like that. Doesn't matter what patch you wear. Some things are just human." Over the next few weeks, Carla and Hannah began to rebuild their lives. The local community, inspired by the bikers' actions, pitched in. People offered furniture, groceries, and even a small, safe apartment in town. And every Sunday morning, a group of gleaming Harleys could be seen parked outside the diner, their riders checking in, bringing groceries, or sometimes just sitting quietly at a table, sharing a coffee, while the sound of a little girl's laughter echoed around them. Months later, when the spring sun had returned and chased the last of the frost from the ground, Hannah showed up at the diner. She ran up to Mason as he was getting off his bike, holding up a piece of paper. It was a drawing made with crayon, showing a row of big black motorcycles, a little girl in a red dress, and a very large man kneeling down to help her. "This is us," she said proudly. Mason looked at the drawing for a long, silent moment. Then he folded it carefully, reverently, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his leather vest, the one right over his heart. "That's going with me wherever I ride," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The drawing, a fragile piece of paper against the tough, weathered leather, had become a new kind of patch, a quiet reminder that the most courageous hearts are often found in the most unexpected places.